Greetings, adventurers, and welcome back to the Den of the Drake. Other dragons hoard gold, while I hoard internet cringe. One thing that keeps life interesting is the fact that we don't have all the answers. What's the deal with Stonehenge? Why do bad things happen to good people? Are we alone in the universe? What happens after we die? And how the hell do some RPG players manage to get a girlfriend? Listen, I play both Dungeons & Dragons and Warhammer 40k, and my main source of income is being a voiceover artist wearing the mask of a cartoon dragon, so it goes without saying that I am just drowning in women. Oh, but don't you worry, I made sure to save some for the rest of you. But my all-knowing and totally factual experience in romance aside, tabletop gamers come in a huge variety of genders and sexual orientations. And relationships do happen in the nerd space. Shocking, I know. Feel free to pause the video and come back if you need time to process that information. But one thing I see time and time again is that nerdy men who manage to get a girlfriend tend to hang on to her tighter than Lizzo hangs on to a ham sandwich. Even if she and her psycho friends are throwing up so many red flags that Winnie the Pooh himself would take a break from running the CCP to reward them with extra social credits. The story I have for you today stars a player who is faced with a tidal wave of tomfuckery when he discovers that his DM has a habit of letting his batshit insane girlfriend do pretty much whatever she wants. Now, without any further delay, let's go ahead and dive right into the horrifying world of r/RPG horror stories. Enjoy. This week's saga comes from Reddit user Pluie Arcos. Part 0 is titled Sing a Song of 7 RPG Hells. The Campaign of the Seven by Pluie Arcos. Warning. This story contains rampant DNPCs, abuse of players by DMs, PvP, main character syndrome, god moding, railroading, blatant cheating, and borderline Mary Sues. Prepare yourselves accordingly because this story is going to feel about as pleasant as a taser to the nethers. This is the story of the most miserable campaign experience I have ever had in my life. And I've been gaming for over 20 years. This was the absolute worst. Here's some contextual background. We were a gaming group that's scattered all over who play D&D style homebrew online, and we've been at it for over 20 years now. A lot of players have come and gone throughout that time, but our campaign and the world it's in has been ongoing from the start. It's changed and grown over time, but the campaign has never ended, and some of us, myself included, are still playing the same characters since day one. They've had their ups and downs, their rises to power and their falls from grace, but many of us have never gotten bored or tired. If anything, we've taken pride in making our characters grow and develop over the course of a generation, to the point of establishing their own dynasties. However, 15 years ago, events happened that almost ruined everything thanks to an overly permissive DM and the girl whom he allowed to have entirely too much power over the entire campaign. Yes, the girl was indeed the DM's girlfriend. Cue exasperated groans in 3, 2, 1. Now for the general overview of the central cast of what we later called RPG Hell. Names have naturally been changed. Me, playing a soldier from another reality stranded in a magical land based strongly on Kara Tur of the Oriental Adventures / Forgotten Realms. He'd originally come from a galaxy-spanning, extremely xenophobic human empire, where war is constant, technology is barely understood, and superstition is rampant. Yet he was something of a free thinker who actively sought to explore and comprehend everything rather than merely accept the status quo imposed upon everyone by crushing laws and ruthless overlords. To answer your next question, yes, the phrase, "suffer not the Xenos to live," is 100% applicable. My character's original homeworld was Caliban. Bravo, the original creator of both the campaign and the host of the site that we used. He had several NPCs that served almost entirely as plot devices, but the name Bravo identifies his primary DMPC, who was also an alien to the game world. Unlike my character, who was essentially a fugitive fleeing pursuit, he was a scholar and an explorer, studying every aspect of the strange land he was more or less stuck in. Sierra, the DM's eventual girlfriend, though not at first. She was playing a cat-girl warrior/warlock multi-class. Her species possessed a strong link to magic and could channel it to enhance their physical abilities. In the beginning, she'd been a pretty cool person to play with, and everyone seemed to like her. India, a human female fire elementalist with an equally fiery temper and judgmental nature. Most of the time, she came off as passive-aggressive and jealous of anyone more capable than her. Echo, a human female practitioner of nature magic, not a druid. She was played by the same person that played India, but had a much different personality. Echo was cheerful, friendly, and had a childlike nature. Foxtrot, a human male generalist mage who was generally rather quiet and shy. Adam, another human male generalist mage. Whiskey, a male assassin who had become more than human due to magical means, whose combat abilities were on the level of Assassin's Creed. He and I used to be friends IRL, but this campaign was the beginning of the end of that. Mike, a male magical warrior who, like Sierra, channeled magic to enhance his powers. Unlike Sierra, who powered up her abilities, Mike channeled magic to recharge and activate the items he used. Yankee, a male high elf who followed the path of the philosopher and sage. His knowledge was vast, but his motivations were often hidden and inscrutable. God damn, OP, do you have enough characters in your f***ing Reddit story? God. Lima, a female cleric dedicated to the campaign's goddess of love. She was one of the NPCs I mentioned that Bravo ran in his role as DM Prime. But in this campaign, she was used as an additional DMPC. Yes, we had more than one DMPC. Insert exasperated groans. As you can probably tell, our campaign was very magic heavy. I was one of the few players with a character that could not cast magic. My character relied on skill, practical experience, ingenuity, and technology, consisting of advanced body armor, a few firearms, and a handful of other items that my character had to maintain. This made my character an anomaly, but gave him some unique strengths that enabled him to do some things that other PCs could not. Everything was fine because everything was kept balanced and fair. I did not have a suit of Mark VII Aquila pattern power armor, nor the patronage of the Adeptus Mechanicus. My weapons were comparatively powerful, but not overwhelmingly so. Power cells could be recharged using sunlight or heat, but that took an extensive amount of time, forcing me to be careful. I could also repair and even build new items, such as replacement ammunition, but at an understandably slow pace, which was only right and proper. It was all about maintaining power balance. Unfortunately, as you can probably deduce on your own, not everyone believed in that policy. Player-wise, there had already been a lot of drama, angst, and conflict. Bravo, Sierra, and I had once upon a time been the core of the party that everyone else more or less followed and relied upon. Bravo had the mass of knowledge, Sierra had powerful melee combat abilities, and I had the ranged firepower and small unit tactics. It was a good system. Sierra and I also had been friendly out of game, although we didn't live anywhere near each other. Then it all came to a screeching halt when she and Bravo IRL announced that they were officially dating, and made their in-character interactions an extension of their out-of-character relationship. Yes, they brought their romantic relationship into the game. Yes, insert exasperated groans again. Yeah, I was understandably upset by this, because not only did my character get completely screwed over when their characters started treating him like he was an intolerable nuisance, and during one adventure actually setting him up to fail so that Sierra would realize that Bravo was the superior partner, but the campaign swiftly became more and more centered around Bravo and Sierra, as she was promoted to the rank of main character and DM's girlfriend. No one accepted their excuse that it's just what our characters would have done, and it resulted in several people quitting the campaign completely out of protest. Sierra quickly started playing the DM's girlfriend card more and more, much to everyone's annoyance. In fact, Whiskey had been the first to object to how the site's message board was becoming a Sierra fan club. as he'd put it, in how several minor adventures had become all about them, with everyone else largely being excluded. Finally, we come to the heart of the story, the campaign of the Seven, which had been created by Sierra herself with Bravo's permission and assistance. Some of us were a little skeptical about the whole thing because she had been advertising it as being epic in scale, and everyone had lost some trust in them both after they railroaded their relationship into the game at my expense. We were right to be suspicious. Several artifacts of supreme power had begun to awaken, with each fragment containing the essence of a godlike entity. When the stars were right, the artifacts would be brought together to reawaken the entity, who would then grant massive power to the ones who commanded the most control over it, i.e. possessed the most items at the end of the campaign, and would be able to completely transform the world. If you're getting Dragon Ball vibes here, you weren't the only ones, because that's exactly how we felt at the time. It only got worse because in order to start off the campaign, Sierra, out of character, contacted several of the other players to find out who was up for becoming the official antagonists of her campaign. You read that right. Existing characters were to become the BBEGs, and they were all supposed to become darker, edgier, and much more powerful versions of themselves in order to reflect the more grim, dark, and epic nature of her campaign. The characters, Bravo, Sierra, India, Echo, Mike, Foxtrot, Adam, and Lima, all became known as the Steel Fist. They all became much more antagonistic and hostile, but they also got a massive boost in experience and abilities in order to represent their becoming attuned to the entity and accepting its power. Yankee specifically rejected the offer to join, which surprised Sierra a little. I found out why much later. He didn't like the feel of her campaign, especially when Sierra wanted to specifically single out my character as the main target of the Steel Fist, as a representative of everything they hated and were against. As it was, he, in character, advised the others against accepting the gifts of Sierra's new benefactor, because overwhelming power, especially if it wasn't earned, corrupts overwhelmingly. The Steel Fist quickly went full-throttle edgelord with a side order of power gamer lightly seasoned with murder hobo. Sierra became some kind of epic-scale samurai fueled by God and anime, and didn't have any time or patience for anyone who wasn't on her level of skill, which was pretty much everyone. And yes, her character's new name became that of a bladed melee weapon. Foxtrot, Adam, and India became stereotypical edgelords, angry at everything for no comprehensive reason for being so. Mike went from being an honorable and respectable warrior to someone who gleefully broke every rule and used every tactic, no matter how underhanded, to win. He'd gone from something akin to a paladin to something more akin to an anti-paladin. Lima transformed overnight from being a cleric of the goddess of love to, you guessed it, a succubus in training. Echo's transformation was downright disturbing, because she'd gone from being whimsical and free-spirited in a genuinely enjoyable and well-portrayed way to someone who subjected herself to body scarification, sadomasochism, and generally insane behavior. Finally, Bravo became a dark scholar who taught the harshest of lessons, and people who came to him for advice paid very high prices for failures to learn or live up to the Steel Fist's extremely high standards. Sierra, out of character, kept insisting over and over that her side wasn't evil or possessed. They were just immoral and more free than before. Sure. At that point, we were seeing more red flags than the Soviet Union during a May Day military parade, especially after they made their stated goal of wanting to crush injustice and usher in a new era of justice, control, and prosperity. Then they made a point of identifying my character, my access to technology, and my reluctance to use it as perfect examples of what they wanted to eliminate. Somehow, in their opinion, my character, who practiced extensive self-restraint and forethought when it came to using his abilities and items, was an obstacle that needed to be removed. Yankee took offense at that notion, pointing out that they were putting me on a pedestal expressly for the purpose of tearing me down from a position that I never wanted in the first place. He also chided them about how they'd compromise their own principles in return for vast power. Yet they were mocked and targeting my character for not compromising on his own. Sierra and the others weren't impressed. Stay out of our way or be crushed. Then Mike demonstrated his Sierra-approved power by destroying one of my character's items, just to prove how powerful he was. And it wasn't just any random item either. It had been a magical weapon that had been specifically gifted to me by Bravo himself, as DM Prime, as a means of apologizing for the railroading previously mentioned. The weapon, a bone blade created from the arm of one of Bravo's other NPCs, wasn't exceptionally powerful, but it served as a reminder that no DM should or could trample on other players and not expect consequences. Destroying the blade outright with no saves or rolls made had been both god-moding and a declaration of intent. They were going to do whatever they wanted regardless of how the rest of us felt about it. Sierra's response when I protested about what happened? It's gone. Deal with it. Me. Looking down at the small pile of dust and fragments that had once been the bone dagger, my character then reached down into that pile and withdrew the blade intact and unblemished. Sierra out of character. Wait a damn minute, you can't do that. Me out of character. It's back. Deal with it. I don't care how powerful Mike's character is, he can't simply destroy an item like that. If I had done something similar to Mike or to you would have thrown a fit and accused me of breaking the rules. No god moding, remember? If you're not gonna follow the rules, then why should I? Besides, I just reversed what Mike just did. He didn't destroy the blade, so no rules were broken. No harm, no foul, correct? Bravo out of character. He's right, Sierra. Let it go. The tone had been set though, and the gauntlet had been thrown. Sierra had been wanting to have adventures that were far more epic in scale and wanted characters to match. She also wanted a game world that reflected that. What she was planning would, if successful, rewrite the entire setting to high difficulty, requiring massively min-max characters that relied upon magic almost exclusively in order to defeat foes that were practically invulnerable to everything but characters equipped with very high levels of magic and magical weapons. Technology would be next to useless because it's not magical, and non-magical abilities were equally helpless. Anyone that wasn't basically playing as an anime main character was going to be relegated exclusively to the role of support. And what was her definition of what an epic character was going to be, in her opinion? It was pretty vague, but her new characters were designed along the lines of an anime series, Fate Stay Night and Bleach. Her own character was basically a combination of Ichigo and Rukia and Archer and Lancer and Assassin and Gilgamesh and Saber all rolled into one. Insert unlimited grown works. At this point, it was starting to get borderline personal for me. Sierra had been making it clear for a while that she didn't like me, and that the feeling was getting mutual. Whatever friendship we had was over. This wasn't a game per se anymore. She had an objective. She'd been given way too much leniency and agency because of her DM's GF status, and she was enjoying the authority she'd been given far too much. What came next was a series of module-style dungeon crawl adventures, where one of the artifacts could be found inside of each. We were competing against the Steel Fist, and cooperation was not an option. We were already at a disadvantage on several levels. Firstly, the Steel Fist coordinated much better because they were playing seriously. They had been promised major rewards at the end of the campaign if they won, and they wanted to collect. Our side was mostly made up of more casual players, a lot of whom were just starting out, so they were still low to mid-level and not used to playing in a high-stakes campaign. Secondly, Sierra as the DM had stacked encounters and outcomes to favor her side. Players who had to leave early, like me since I had to work in the morning, were penalized experience points. Parties that wasted too much time were penalized experience points. Players who had to leave had to put their characters in limbo. The adventure continued, but their involvement ceased, meaning if a battle occurred, the party could be down members. At the time, her own characters never seemed to suffer the same problems. Thirdly, Sierra's party was so overpowered in comparison that running into them invariably led to combat that they had decisive advantage in. Why negotiate with an enemy party when they're only a fraction of your strength and have nothing tangible to offer? 3 5th level characters do not equal even one 15th level character. Fourth, Sierra created the dungeons herself, stocked them herself, and was running a DMPC. The problem there was obvious. Lastly, there were cases where Sierra openly cheated. One example was when the Dice Emperor had obviously blessed me with several natural 20s in a row. Sierra actually accused me of cheating and demanded that I re-roll. I refused because I'd been using the site's random number generator the whole time, and it had been Bravo himself who had installed it when he created the site in the first place. Bravo out of character. Sierra, the numbers are purely random. He's just doing well tonight. It's fine. Sierra out of character. No, he's doing too well. I want him to re-roll. Me out of character. No, I refuse. If you're accusing me of cheating, then prove it. Show me evidence, because it would mean that I'm hacking the site and messing with the codes, which is something I have no idea how to do in the first place. So if you think I'm cheating, prove it. She dropped the issue. This time. However, things kept getting more and more difficult. In one of her dungeon crawls, the Sierra party wound up getting 2 artifacts instead of 1. Her explanation? We'd taken too long and another member of the Steel Fist succeeded in getting to it before we did, because we'd failed to meet a time limit that had never been divulged to us. Up to that point, she'd made it clear that only 1 artifact could be acquired in each of her adventures, not multiple. In another of her adventures, we lost by default because I'd been unable to join for a week as I had been away on vacation and out of contact, and not enough other people had joined in. Therefore, the Steel Fist won by default because no one else wanted to play against them. Insert shriek of cosmic frustration here. After completing and losing the 6th dungeon, enthusiasm began to plummet. The only people who were enjoying themselves were players of the Steel Fist, and that was because they were trampling over everyone else, and no one could effectively oppose them since, level-wise, they were double digits ahead of everyone else. In other words, they were being a whole bunch of those guys and those girls. Sierra was getting angry because no one was enjoying her campaign or her epic characters. I was getting angry because we were running out of time and a lot of other players didn't understand what was at stake. Was this a "am I the jerk" moment for me? More than likely, and with good reason. By that time, I was feeling more and more like I was the last line of defense, and if I failed, then a lot more people would be quitting and leaving the site. It was around that time that a few new developments happened that returned some hope to RPG hell. First, Yankee joined forces against Sierra's group. He'd been sitting on the fence for a while, just observing, but had decided that she really had stacked things in her favor for far too long. Secondly, a few of Sierra's players out of character agreed with Yankee. They were really enjoying an unfair advantage, and Sierra was making the campaign far too serious. India removed herself from the Steel Fist, and Foxtrot exorcised himself of the entity, losing all of his gained levels and choosing to fight against Sierra instead. We were also allowed to run an additional adventure where we were able to successfully steal 2 of the artifacts from the Steel Fist. So by the end of that adventure, we had 3 artifacts in our possession. It was also at that time that I completed a series of side adventures, all signed off on by Bravo, and tallied up the last of the gained experience. It had been risky, but I had succeeded in raising my character up to the same level as some of the people in Sierra's party. My character was now on equal terms with any one of them. In a one-on-one basis, the fight would be fair. Echo was impressed. Mike and Adam were nervous. Sierra, however, was angry. She apparently did not like the idea of my character being the same level as hers. Finally, there had been an open confrontation against Sierra out of character. After the time limit loophole and the default win, people were pissed. I'd openly accused her of giving her players unfair advantages that enabled them to win far more than they should have. Whiskey, Yankee, and several others backed me up. They all agreed that Sierra really did seem to be changing parameters and including hidden conditions into her adventures that only favored her side. Sierra didn't like me accusing her of railroading, but Yankee backed me up on that as well. She was setting all the details, and the time limit loophole had never been discussed with anyone. She dropped that into everyone's laps after the fact when it was too late to do anything about it. In other words, we were all playing by rules that she'd written but never shared a copy of. We rightfully felt like we were getting scammed. The ultimatum was given. The remaining adventures, and there weren't many at all, had to have all their parameters and victory conditions discussed openly and agreed upon before the start. Otherwise, we would declare her campaign over and any changes she planned declared null. Her adventures weren't role-playing. They were PvP competitions with the stated outcome being potentially massive changes to our entire game world that we'd all be forced to abide by. And more, it was looking like she was desperate to implement it all, even if that meant ramming it down our collective throats. We were being put into a position, against our will, of having to either roll up entirely new characters under an entirely different set of rules, or become effectively obsolete in a new setting that we'd have no say in. She assured us that this was never really her intent, but none of us really believed her, especially after she repeatedly tested positive for main character syndrome. No, Sierra, we don't care about how much you love Bleach. You cannot introduce the Soul Hunters into our campaign. You cannot introduce monsters that can only be killed by weapons that your chosen ones can manifest. And you cannot become a Catgirl version of Ichigo. We refuse to go along with this. Ultimately, she complied, but she did not like it one bit. Once again, I had challenged her authority and won. It turned out later that she'd kept score of my disrespect towards her, and she had intended to retaliate. And retaliate she did, but that's a different story altogether. Finally, the date for the last battle was set, and the parameters were discussed in full in advance. The remainder of the Steel Fist would be engaging in direct battle against everyone else. Even though her party was outnumbered by about 3-1, her party still had a distinct advantage because of their levels totaled up was much higher than anyone else's. The Steel Fist consisted of several very high-level characters versus a large number of low to mid-level characters. Only a few characters, mine included, were anywhere near 15th level, and every character in Sierra's party could potentially one-shot anyone they hit. The stars were right, and the countdown had begun, and experience points in massive amounts were going to be distributed among whoever was left standing among the victors. And the pool of experience points was in the millions. Welcome to the 7th layer of RPG Hell, known as the Thunderdome. The battle took over 2 hours from start to finish, and despite the level of imbalance, the Steel Fist won only by the slimmest of margins. The highlight of the battle had been a genuinely epic one-on-one battle between none other than Bravo and myself, with his character launching an all-out attack intended to take my character out as quickly as possible. He struck with absolute surety, completely confident that the mere mundane and my toys wouldn't be able to resist or stand against the perfection of magic. Rolls to attack were made. Hit. Damage would be extreme if it wasn't blocked. Roll to block. Natural 20. Confirmed. With a speed and precision unlike anything he'd ever seen or expected, Bravo was stunned into silence as his perfectly delivered attack was effortlessly deflected by the contemptible barbarian before him. He wielded a sword whose blade had snapped in half long ago, but it had withstood the impact of his own attack. For a brief moment, the sound of metal against metal canceled out all other noise, only to be replaced by the determined shout of that barbarian. A shout that was both a promise and a prayer. 3 words. The Emperor protects! Sierra out of character. No! Reroll that! Me out of character. Why? It was a verified roll. Sierra out of character. I want you to re-roll that block. There's no way you could have blocked it. Me, out of character. Ugh, not this again. The random number generator is random. I have as much control over it as you do, and that melee round unfolded exactly as the rules dictate. Sierra, out of character. Reroll that last defense or you're banned. Bravo, out of character. Sierra, no! You're out of line. The result stands. From that moment forward, my character was battling non-stop and not able to assist anyone else. At first, it was only Bravo I was fighting, but then Mike and Sierra quickly joined in. Against 3-to-1 odds, I was worn down and defeated. I just hoped that I'd bought everyone else a chance to win. Unfortunately, it wasn't enough. Everyone else, being much less powerful and not nearly as well equipped, was overwhelmed. Time had run out. The entity of the Seven was summoned. Sierra was thrilled. However, Bravo exercised his authority as a DM Prime and changed the outcome. Because Sierra had only just barely won, the entity could not transform/rewrite the entire game world. In that part, at least, we had won. However, the remaining Steel Fist members who hadn't been defeated, Sierra, Bravo, Adam, Echo, and Mike, could keep the experience points reward as decided beforehand. Sierra was furious and tripled the amount, declaring that it was to compensate everyone for having to deal with OP's bullshit. Yes, she openly blamed me. Adam, India, and some of the others immediately protested. No one had made any complaints about my behavior, in character or otherwise. Whiskey even went so far as to accuse Sierra of doing it purely out of spite, and dragging everyone else into her feud with me. Ultimately, Bravo used his authority as DM Prime to settle the matter. Sierra's decision would stand, and it was the start of him siding with Sierra more and more over time. India retained the massive XP boost both of her characters received, but began participating less. Mike gladly kept his boost, and while he scaled back the in-character antagonism slightly, he still played his character like he was Gaston from Beauty and the Beast. Adam rejected all of the experience points he had been awarded, telling Sierra that her whole campaign had been a bunch of crap. Sierra, Bravo, and Lima naturally kept their XP awards, putting all three characters in an even greater lead over the rest of us. The rest of us soon got into the habit of interacting as little as possible with the Steel Fist characters, much to their extreme surprise. After everything they've done and how they had behaved, they were dumbfounded by our reluctance to trust them. If they'd had been merely possessed, then that would have been one thing. But they had embraced the changes and reveled in it all, to the point of actively bullying and victimizing our characters. Them out of character. It's how our characters would have acted. Me out of character. And this is how our characters would have reacted. Did you honestly think that other people's opinions of you wouldn't change? It never crossed your mind? Short answer, it didn't. They honestly believed that after all that happened, we'd just go back to being friends, and everything would be water under the bridge. Insert scene from Family Guy. Hey Lois, remember the time that a Redditor tried to insert a literal and unironic Family Guy cutaway into his Reddit story? It was the most Redditor thing I've ever seen anyone do. Fine, OP, I'll play your game. Stewie.
I got my money. Your wounds have healed up nicely. What do you say we let bygones be bygones?
Brian. You shot me in both my knees and then lit me on fire. Piss off. Can you tell I don't really watch Family Guy? Because I think it's pretty obvious that I don't really watch Family Guy. Consequently, not only did a few more people drop out entirely, or at least reduce their participation for a long time, it further divided our group into what became known as the two camps that were both mutually at odds with one another. Sierra and I became the de facto representations of both. Sierra represented the serious, hardcore players who were out to win and get rewards. words. I represented the role players and the story makers who were building and adding to the game world that we'd all created over the course of 5+ years. Her next few adventures did indeed revolve almost exclusively around her ultra-powerful characters, but there was so little interest in participating in them that they largely faded into the background over several months. Gradually, the bad feelings created by the campaign of the Seven began to dissipate a little, but the damage had been done. At that point, I hated Sierra and automatically assumed that anything she tried to do that involved me was to my detriment. Paranoid? Perhaps, but after all the time she tried to railroad and undermine my character, after all the cheating, I had no reason to trust her. Worse, over the course of the next year or so, the animosity caused by RPG Hell would fester into something much worse. The war was coming, and it almost ended our gaming group for good. But that is a different story, and for now, this story comes to its end. Well, OP, you're on my shit list for making me read through a bunch of characters that ended up not even mattering, and including a literal Family Guy cutaway, but I'll let it slide, because holy shit, Sierra is quite the piece of work. I've read a lot of RPG horror stories, and I mean a lot. But Sierra is a first-time offender for a lot of things on this channel. The first thing I want to go over is the one that I'm sure a lot of you are waiting for me to cover, that being how the f did Sierra manage to make the concept of a DMPC worse? See, conventional DMPCs usually spawn when a DM decides that they also want to be a player and make a character that's able to god mode the world that they've created. This is the first time I've ever seen a player push the existing DM out of their chair and plop their ass in it in order to god mode the entire story with their character they already made. It's like a reverse DMPC, and I don't even know what to call it. Is it a player master player character? A dungeon master player character? I don't know. I need to stop thinking so hard before the smooth brain I've worked so hard to get gains a wrinkle. Obviously, giving a player the DM seat while they also simultaneously play their pre-existing character is a no-go from me. There isn't a world where the implicit bias isn't gonna shine through, even if there wasn't a person like Sierra at the reins. But unfortunately, there is someone like Sierra at the reins, and she's looking to craft the most anime-looking horse imaginable. Okay, second concern. I've heard of splitting the party, but this is just stupid. Now, the idea of DMing for two parties who are in direct conflict with one another sounds interesting, but so does doing a backflip into the Grand Canyon. Doesn't mean that I'm gonna recommend that anyone should try it. The idea failed in its execution for a variety of reasons, but the one that I keep coming back to is the fact that the one true god is a member of one of the teams. This is by definition a campaign based on the player versus DM mentality. So color me surprised when people started having some issues. OP, I'm a Warhammer fan. Trust me, I understand as good as anyone that the Emperor protects. But considering how there's 4 more parts to this story, I'm not so sure he's protecting you, buddy. Part 1 is titled RPG Hell, The War, Part 1. Hello once again. As promised, I've returned to tell the story of what happened after the campaign of 7. I've broken it up into parts to make it easier to read. However, I'm warning you in advance that the contents of this retelling includes examples of maliciousness, manipulation, histrionics, gaslighting, and in one case, actual IRL bullying. The people who orchestrated these things didn't do any of this by accident. It was intentional, and ultimately, this story does not have a happy ending. After the events of the campaign of 7, detailed in the story Sing a Song of 7 RPG Hells, things slowly started to go back to a semblance of normalcy. We were all back to gaming, but there was an undercurrent of distrust between the two camps. Sierra's railroading had crossed lines that shouldn't have been crossed, and a lot of players in character and out of character weren't comfortable with her any longer. The players who had benefited exclusively because of her were pretty harsh with their criticism, telling us all that we just needed to get over it all. We just responded by reminding them that almost all of their newfound bonuses and strengths had been the result of keystrokes, and Sierra's cheating. Remember, all of them were at least a dozen levels higher than anyone else. But they didn't like that, since they didn't feel like they had done anything wrong. It was all just a game after all. Naturally, none of them would have felt nearly as enthusiastic if the positions had been reversed. Over the next few months, new adventures were had. New sections of our game world were visited and explored, and new PC parties gradually came together. Sierra had her group and everyone else had theirs, and the two groups generally avoided each other. Some members were hopeful that, in time, everything would return to the way it was. I was not hopeful. Everything that happened to me during RPG Hell had felt deliberate and targeted. After all of that, I wanted as little to do with Sierra as possible, in character or out of character. If nothing else had happened, then maybe the war could have been avoided. It's been a long time, and not only have I had a lot of time to think about it, but I've also had a lot of discussions with everyone involved. Many of them have consistently pointed at the one girl who had been involved in everything. Even Bravo put the majority of the blame on her instead of Sierra. Delta. Almost everyone blames Delta for causing our entire group to detonate like Chernobyl. Introducing the main characters of this story. If you've read my first post here, then you'll already be familiar with the names. Me, author of this story. Bravo, DM Prime of our game world, and yes, he was still using a DM PC. Sierra, DM's girlfriend in character and out of character, sufferer of main character syndrome. Her resume would soon be expanded to site admin with way too much authority and conflicts of interest. Foxtrot, Delta's hopeful boyfriend who always backed her up, in character and out of character. And finally, Delta. Her character was a human female pyromancer who specialized in explosions. Big explosions. The more spectacular, the better. She was a genuine know-it-all that had a habit of trying to correct everyone else when they did anything wrong, in her opinion. And she had lots of opinions that she was eager to prove the validity of because she loved to debate. Wait. Why haven't I made any distinctions between in character and out of character about her? Because looking back, I don't think there was a distinction with her. That was red flag number 1. Delta was one of the original players of our group, and at first, she was a decent player with a decent character. No one had too many complaints, and good times were had by all. After RPG Hell, she and Sierra started becoming friends IRL. And Delta started developing some genuinely annoying habits that went beyond mere in-character quirks. First, she started correcting people more and more over things that were really minor, like spelling mistakes, proper grammar, punctuation, and character development. It got to a point where she began lecturing other players out of character for minor mistakes in character. That got annoying very quickly because it interrupted the game and took up time. Not to mention it was never her responsibility to audit or evaluate anyone. She also began butting into conversations that she really didn't understand or even needed to involve herself in. This eventually led to a massive argument at one point after she inserted herself into an out-of-character conversation about astronomy, and it became obvious that she knew very little about the subject. A few of the others joined in and told Delta that she not only misunderstood the whole conversation, but she was wrong about what she had been saying. Instead of saying, "Oops, I'm sorry, I stand corrected," she got angry and defensive, insisting that we had no right to tell her that she was wrong. But she was wrong. None of us were going to tell her that she was right when she wasn't. The more we stood our ground, the angrier she got. Finally, we just got fed up with dealing her and logged out simultaneously. We didn't want to deal with her, and she completely ruined the mood. No adventuring that night. Her habit of trying to get people to improve their characters got worse too. She'd choose other players to choose different skills or adopt different personality traits. Basically, it was a bunch of nitpicking that made it seem more and more like she wanted to make other people's characters develop to her expectations. She took special offense to my character, the veteran soldier, and his battle tactics. During one session, our characters were talking in character, and mine brought up some previous battles he had been in, how he had used his sniper rifle within those battles, and his tactics in those kinds of fights. One shot, one kill, shoot then move and don't delay. Delta took that as a personal affront.
So, you mean to tell me that you don't feel anything when you do that?
Me, in character. Yeah, recoil. Delta, in character.
That is horrible. You need to change that. How can you just kill so easily?
Me, in character. Because my people are fighting for our survival, and if we back down for an instant, we'll be exterminated. We don't have a choice. Negotiation isn't an option, especially when we're facing enemies whose interest in us is purely nutritional. Delta then proceeded to start lecturing about morality to such a degree that it got really confusing about whether or not she was even RPing anymore. I then went out of character and reminded her at length of my character's background. A grimdark setting where there was only war. However, he'd long since changed and ceased being nearly as hostile as he would have otherwise been. Compared to other characters from that setting, he was ridiculously tolerant, and accepting to a degree that would have been considered heresy. What she was demanding sounded more and more like she wanted my character to stop being a soldier completely, and become something else entirely. It was genuinely feeling like she was trying to rewrite my character. Delta, both in character and out of character.
I am trying to help you make your character better.
Me, out of character. If I wanted your help, I would have asked for it. I didn't, so please stop. You're becoming annoying and overbearing. There were other arguments, all of them equally petty and questionable in their necessity. All of them became progressively more aggravating and time-consuming because Delta treated them like unresolved issues she wanted some kind of closure on. They eventually went from being about character interactions to objections and rants about past and current interactions between Sierra and I. Yes, Sierra. Delta began inserting herself into that and adding her own complaints and demands onto how to resolve those unresolved problems. Old wounds were being deliberately reopened, old resentments were being agitated, and Sierra seemed fine with letting Delta act like her personal mouthpiece and cheerleader. The opening shots of what would become the war had been fired. End of part 1. Much shorter than part 1. I don't normally mind longer posts, especially ones like these which are well written and don't make me think I'm having a brain aneurysm while I'm reading them. But I am aware that there's a group of people on RPG Horror Stories who just love to make themselves heard about post length. It feels like you can't scroll more than 10 posts without some man-baby whining about how, "Oh, the posts on my subreddit are too long." Firstly, mind your business, this pays my bills, and secondly, why are you so upset about the subreddit with stories in the title making you read? It feels like I've gotten to the point in my YouTube career where making fun of Redditors surrounding the stories is just as fun as making fun of the characters in the stories. Speaking of characters in stories, Delta. Yikes. Dude, there is nothing more irritating than someone trying to tell you that the way your character is wrong. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize that there was a correct way. Please forgive me. Look, when a player is being actively disruptive with a shitty character concept, it's okay to bring it to their attention and tell them that the way that they play their character is ruining your enjoyment of the game. That's open communication, and it's something that people should try more often. What is not okay, however, is trying to act like there is an objective way to play a character, and accusing the other player of not following it. Because the reality is that there isn't a way to play a character objectively. And acting like there is a one-way ticket to the country of I'm a Dickistan. Well, that's 2 parts down. How about we continue to crawl towards our unhappy ending that OP mentioned, shall we? Part 2 is titled RPG Hell, The War Part 2. Author's foreword. Readers so far are probably wondering if Delta and Sierra had some underlying issues that made them behave the way they did. My response to these questions are thus. Number 1. They never once made it clear that they even had issues. There was a girl in our group who suffered from bipolar disorder, but we all knew about it because she had been honest from the start. Delta and Sierra, on the other hand, made no such admission. Number 2. They never asked for anyone's understanding or patience. Number 3. Not once did they ever apologize to anyone for what they did. Number 4. They were both warned repeatedly over a long period of time that their behavior was inappropriate, disruptive, and hurtful. As it was, they allowed whatever out-of-character IRL problems they had to become major in-character/RP problems that everyone else was forced to involuntarily suffer through. Number 5. Because of genuine abuse that I have suffered as a child, I am a firm believer that no degree of mental illness or trauma, however mild, should ever be used as an excuse to justify or trivialize physical, mental, or emotional abuse of another person. Just because you have trauma doesn't give you the right to traumatize others. Instead of having fun like we were supposed to, we were all being forced to walk on eggshells, bend over backwards, and conform more and more for the sake of 2 people who demanded respect but gave little in return. Why am I even mentioning this? Because you're going to be asking these questions more and more as the story progresses of just what the bleep was up with those 2, and how the hell did things ever get that bad? With that out of the way, let's roll post. Delta and Sierra had begun to cooperate, and it seemed like the difference between in-character and out-of-character interactions with them had become nearly indistinguishable. They'd begun to target and criticize other players whose characters they felt were annoying, but I was still their primary target, mostly because I had the audacity to oppose them both. Between dealing with Sierra's passive-aggressiveness and ultra-contemptiveness, and weathering Delta's almost constant sarcasm, snark, and crappy criticism, I was really starting to not enjoy myself. Delta's motto at the time was, and I quote, "I poke, you wiggle." And she made it clear that the more people got upset, the more she'd taunt them. I'd already nearly quit outright at one point after one session of Delta's piss-poor attitude. I reconsidered and came back after 3 more people convinced me to stay, and they promised that they'd tell Delta to knock her crap off, which she did for a while. But overall, things were steadily getting worse. Sierra's character was becoming more and more dominant, and she really hated the idea that anyone having weapons that could be used against her. At the time, my own character had begun researching and developing ways to create anti-magical weapons. Magic-using enemies were so common it made sense to try and find ways of suppressing or even negating their greatest advantages. Plus, if Sierra ever tried to create RPG Hell 2 Electric Boogaloo, I wanted my character to have something capable of countering her. At the same time, Delta was becoming so openly sarcastic and snide that it became contagious. More players who had been a part of Sierra's camp were joining the edginess and happily antagonizing everyone they could. A few more new members tried to join our group around that time. Emphasis on tried. Past tense. I had introduced one girl, Vela, to our group, and I was hoping that she'd join. She gave it a shot, she logged in, introduced herself, and tried to get started with creating a character for herself in order to join the game. Delta and a couple of others targeted her. Not long after that, she logged out and never went back. Delta and the others had been so hostile towards her that she felt completely unwelcome. She contacted me later and warned me to be careful. Delta seemed to have an incredible amount of hatred towards me. I was angered by that and confronted everyone in the group. Delta had practically chased a potential new player out of the IRC main chat at the time, when we were looking for new people. Delta had practically chased a potential new player out of the IRC main chat at a time when we were looking for new people. Bravo and the other admins' overall reaction had been dismissive. One of them had even gone so far as to say something along the lines of, "Yeah, if she couldn't handle a little bit of hazing." I'd immediately reminded them that we were trying to get people to join our group, not leave. Vela's experience had been so bad that there was a good chance that she could have informed others about how badly she had been treated. It was precisely the kind of thing that we didn't need. As it was, things continued to stagnate. No one new joined our group, and Delta continued to grow into her new role of the Queen of Mean. and Sierra started trying to tie our site and group into her idea for a commissioned art business that she was trying to create. I, naturally, hated the idea, because it felt like it was a step towards turning our group into a business instead of a game and a hobby. Bravo disagreed, and Sierra got the go-ahead to start showcasing her work on our IRC site, which meant that we were being used as a test audience. This wasn't necessarily good, since we were dealing with so many internal problems. We were spending more and more time on administrative functions than actually gaming, which was the whole purpose of our group in the first place. If Sierra wanted to start a business, then fine, good for her. She should have left the rest of us out of it, since we didn't want to be employees. I just wanted to have fun and play the damn game with everyone else, not become the precursor to Critical Role 15 years before it was even created. Finally, the gathering storm began to come ashore as Delta and Sierra decided that they had had enough of me and started working together to remove me as a problem. They made an official demand to punish me, and Delta delivered a long list of grievances that they both had about me. The laundry list included, but was not limited to, my character was researching and developing anti-magical weaponry that could specifically harm Sierra's character. Cease, desist, and destroy all research. My character had already created a prototype anti-magical weapon, a sword that had already proven that it could drain magic. Get rid of it. Punitive damages had to be applied to my character for being too powerful. Nani the f***? Sierra was twice the level of my character. I needed to be punished out of character for my disrespect and defiance of Sierra's authority as a DM. I also needed to apologize directly to Sierra for upsetting her so much in general. Delta also added her own items of grievance, calling for my character to be redesigned and changed. She also wanted me to apologize directly to her as well, for unspecified reasons. She also wanted my apology to Sierra to be acceptable by her standards too. Yes, they wanted me to apologize to them individually and collectively, but didn't specify exactly what they were upset about. They wanted me to figure it out and become a more caring and mindful person in the process. When I asked them how the hell I was expected to figure that out, they just told me to read through all of their previous posts, contemplate their feelings, and think about it because sacrifices need to be made. They wanted me to figure out why they were so angry and do so with no tangible information at all. They just wanted me to guess their feelings blindly and make sacrifices on their behalf. It was completely, genuinely insane, and I told them so. I told them and everyone else that their demands were ridiculous and their feelings really didn't matter to me. My character wasn't doing anything outside the scope of the rules, and given how enormously powerful Sierra in character was, she was not allowed to complain. If Sierra was so afraid of that sword, then clearly it was doing its job of keeping her in check. As for all the disrespect, I had every right to challenge her during RPG Hell, given how often she bent and broke the rules in order to guarantee favorable outcomes. If either of them were upset, then they had no one to blame because they were making themselves upset. I wasn't contacting them in any way out of character, and in character I avoided them as much as possible. I'd adhered to every rule we had regarding player interactions to the letter. To the letter. As for figuring out their feelings, why? Neither one of them were anything to me other than casual acquaintances. I wasn't in a relationship with either of them, nor were they relatives or close friends. I knew next to nothing about them on a personal level, so there was absolutely no way in hell that I would ever be able to figure out anything about their feelings, since none of us knew anything about each other. Was I being a bit of a that guy? Yes, and for good reason. After all the crap I had been put through by and because of them, I had no desire to even try. Delta's "I poke, you wiggle" attitude was insensitive at best, and I had no reason to trust Sierra at all. Now they were making unreasonable demands and insisting on sacrifices that were basically stripping me in character and out of character of both agency and ability. I'd been leaving them both alone for a long time, but they weren't reciprocating. I was the one who needed to be left alone and apologized to, not the other way around. I then started posting parts of our own IRC logs of the two of them having out-of-character conversations together, making all kinds of nasty remarks and comments about me behind my back, in a separate part of the site where they clearly never expected anyone to actually read the backlogs. Unfortunately for them, I had read those logs, and I hadn't been the only one. If I'm making complaints, at least there's an actual reason for them. The same can't be said about you two. Delta and Sierra had finally begun their opening barrage, but I'd returned fire with a sustained counter-barrage of my own that they never anticipated. The war was in full swing at that point, and it was only going to get worse. End of part 2. I poke, you wiggle. I poke, you wiggle. I poke, you wiggle. How about we try I smack you upside the head and you stop pretending you're all quirky and get real quiet real fast? Look, I get the appeal of messing with people. A full 90% of my personality revolves around messing with people's status quo because it's funny. But there's a difference between going goblin mode and just being a twat. I'll let you guess which one I think Delta falls under. The coming forward with a list of demands part also really rubs me the wrong way. I find that people who are the first to try and expose others are often the ones with the most dirt on them that can be exposed. I like to think that I can be a somewhat compassionate guy when I want to be. But there's been this narrative running around that the whole world must respect your feelings, and here's the thing, it really doesn't. In my world, there are 3 God-given rights. The right to keep and bear arms, the right to love whoever you want to love, and the right to not give a fuck. The sheer entitlement that goes into the thought process here. Listen, OP, something that you did upset the two of us, but because we are such nice people, we're going to turn this into an opportunity to make you a better person. We will be gracious enough to allow you to comb through the possible thousands of messages on this board in order to figure out specifically what you said or did before crawling back to prostrate yourself before the entire group. Oh, f*** off. Big props to OP for his reaction here. I mentioned earlier that clear and honest communication is something that more people should try, and OP was certainly clear and honest. I don't care. Oh, it gives me some Marcus Aurelius stoicism vibes. So much bullshit that we see in our everyday lives, peddled by people who think that they're more important than they really are, can be shut down by those 3 simple words. I don't care. Damn, maybe the next piece of merch I make will include a picture of my face and the phrase, "the right to not give a f***." I'm sure it would sell like hotcakes and people totally wouldn't look at you weird for wearing it. But of course, if you lean too heavily into that philosophy, you end up becoming overly apathetic and cynical, and you might even end up making a YouTube channel starring a cartoon dragon, which is a fate worse than death, so be careful, you crazy kids. Part 3 is titled RPG Hell, The War, Part 3. The end has come. Author's foreword. I've dealt with a great many manipulative and deceptive people in my life. I also know from painful experience what emotions can be weaponized and used to trick and mislead others. The best way to protect yourself from a con artist is to know all the tricks. I fully believed that Delta and Sierra had been pretending to be upset and angry in order to manipulate everyone else into supporting them. Years later, I found out that I had been 100% correct. Unfortunately, everyone at the time had fallen for their ruse. Under my overt display of insensitivity, what happened next was essentially a trial. In and out of character, my continued existence within the group was on the line, and it soon became clear to me that most of the support I had previously had during RPG Hell had been diminished. It wasn't until later that I had gotten confirmation. It had been planned in advance. Some of the other players admitted later on that they had been contacted offline and intimidated by one or both of the girls. They were genuinely afraid of Delta and Sierra at that point. Another guy contacted me and told me that he had been invited to a group chat hosted by both girls. Mike, Whiskey, and Foxtrot had been there, listening to Delta and Sierra talking about me and getting progressively angrier and angrier. He then told me that he had noped out of there within minutes because both girls seemed to be genuinely obsessed with me and not in a fun way. Foxtrot's general attitude towards me had gotten much more openly hostile. It only ever got worse over time, the more Delta fixated on me. It didn't take a genius to understand why, since his crush on Delta was well known to all of us. Bravo had become much the same way. He was siding with and supporting Sierra more and more. At that point, the question of who was actually in charge had been raised yet again. I had a few people on my side by then, but the matter was not a fair trial at that point. There was no jury of my peers because it seemed like the admins were getting angry at me for not giving Sierra and Delta what they wanted just to shut them up and let everyone else get back to the damn game. Over the next couple of days, it was non-stop arguing and fighting. All gaming had been suspended. Yankee had been nominated as a neutral arbiter, and he ultimately determined that neither side was right or wrong. I was being antagonistic in his opinion, but I was being provoked and antagonized as well. It was what he had called a true conundrum. I objected because Delta had called on me to make sacrifices. I felt like I was being singled out and bullied. I wasn't being allowed to explore any new avenues of growth and advancement that I wanted to. Meanwhile, Sierra was being allowed to do whatever she wanted, develop however she wanted, and Delta was being permitted to be an obnoxious and overbearing party mom that no one wanted or needed. I was sick of the free passes and sacrifices that were always being made for Sierra. I was sick of Delta's nasty attitude. I was sick of apologizing for things that had been long since resolved. And I was sick of playing Guess the Grievance on account of two people who really weren't worth the effort being demanded. I'm not the problem here. They are. They're playing all of you for fools. Get rid of them before they destroy our group. Yes, I went there. I said it. I went full throttle that guy. I'm not asking AITA because I know I was, and I make zero apologies for it because it had been a long time coming and long overdue. Unfortunately, it was too late at that point. Delta and Sierra had spent weeks, maybe months, poisoning everyone's opinions of me. They weren't entirely successful since I had formed some genuine friendships with some of the other players that persist to this day. However, they had slandered and smeared me in the eyes of enough of the other players that most of them sided with Sierra and Delta instead of me. Others had been intimidated into remaining neutral. Emotions had been running too high for far too long, and cooler heads were not allowed to prevail. The decision was made that because I refused to work with anyone to come up with an acceptable resolution to the massive problem, it was decided that I was the one who needed to go, not Delta or Sierra. I was told to quietly depart and never return. One of the others, Echo, told me, "Get out of our lives and get on with yours." The exile had begun, and Delta wasted no time in celebrating openly. She and Sierra had been looking forward to me leaving for a while, and all the work they had put in had finally paid off. I was gone. Everyone else had hoped that over the next week or two, maybe tempers would cool, rational minds would eventually prevail, and decisions would be reconsidered, and the game would ultimately resume. They were horribly mistaken on all counts. None of those things happened. I already had a contingency plan and transferred my character in its entirety over to a new group and had been welcomed happily. The new group was made up mostly of the people who had quit our group. There was a lot of resentment between the new group and Bravo, and that suited me just fine. My joining their group was taken as an insult to both Sierra and Bravo. AITA? Hell yes and no regrets. Sierra officially laid down new rules in the campaign from that point forward. She was in charge, and there were two sets of rules, one for her and the other for everyone else. The main character had finally arrived. Everyone who obeyed their rules would be fine, and anyone who resisted would be dealt with in the same way that I had. Yes, she literally used what had been done to me as a threat to keep the others in line. Delta soon found new people to harass. One friend of mine got bullied so badly that it caused her actual IRL problems due to the stress and anxiety that she was being continually subjected to. Delta did it because my friend's character was annoying. Soon afterwards, my friend got banned from the site because she finally snapped and berated Delta online. No, Delta was not banned despite her openly admitting what she had been doing. She hated my friend, said she was annoying, and that she should have been banned from the site much sooner. Then Delta went after someone else because that person was irritating. Then Delta went after someone else because that person hadn't supported them enough during the war against me. Delta then shattered Foxtrot by telling him, in character and out of character, that he was never going to be anything more than a friend to her. He'd done everything she'd asked of him and supported her every step of the way, but in the end, he had just been friend-zoned with extreme prejudice. Sierra then broke up with Bravo, saying that they'd become different people with different interests. She still had supreme authority, though. However, her epic scale campaigns didn't get very far. Her commissioned art business, it failed hard. Delta kept on attacking one person after another, on and on, over and over. Everyone began to openly hate her because of it, but no one could do anything about her because Sierra made a point of actively protecting her. Knowing that, Delta openly flaunted her special position, knowing that she could do pretty much whatever she wanted to whoever she wanted, and Sierra would still protect her. That was the final straw for a lot of people, and they started quitting as well. But what was the point of even trying? Our entire group, which had persisted for almost 7 years at that point, had been rendered foobar because of 2 players. And if they had been banned instead of me, the entire nightmare could have been averted. But too many of them had been convinced that it was somehow all my fault, and couldn't understand the idea of admitting that they had been wrong. So I remained exiled and continued to have infinitely more fun with my new gaming group, while they continued to suffer antagonism and abuse from Delta and Sierra. Later on, I found out that my character's departure was even included in the game. It had been done as a means of taking one last parting stab at me out of character. Within the game, fires burned and a few characters openly celebrated in the streets as my character's former home and holdings were plundered and razed. Certain items and places were destroyed to prevent them from falling into the wrong hands. Other things were destroyed out of spite. Delta danced and sang as all traces of my character were cast down and broken into shards, his name erased and replaced with a title meant to convey contempt and hatred: The Exile. Some who remained despised him because they had been told to do so. Others hated him because he'd opposed them. The rest feared him. They feared him because he had been right the entire time. No one had listened to him, and now it was too late. They feared him because he was the manifestation of their own cowardice. They'd broken every oath and betrayed every trust. Justice had failed and honor had been tainted. They feared him because of his last enraged words, screamed at them as he faded from sight. "I'm coming for all of you!" Okay, a little melodramatic towards the end there, but I don't know what I expected from the guy who inserted a Family Guy cutaway into his Reddit story, but I digress. Yes, OP, you were a bit of an asshole, and I can see that you have a modicum of self-awareness because you were able to point that out. But you know who has absolutely zero self-awareness? Sierra and Delta. Holy crap, I know I made a little joke at the beginning that there was so many red flags that the CCP was gonna give her a medal or something. I don't know, I forget what I said. But I wasn't expecting the story to literally devolve into a nerdy-ass version of Mao's Cultural Revolution. Was this some kind of social experiment about communism with less breadlines or something? I will admit, I'm having a bit of a hard time believing how any RPG group could get this bad, but let's go ahead and take off our critical thinking caps and assume that y'all are a bunch of boiling frogs, and no one has mentioned how hot the pot has gotten. People like Sierra and Delta do exist. You know, narcissists who take personal offense against anyone who would dare question their authority on even the most meaningless things. And despite narcissists being all too common in the age of the iPhone, megalomaniacal ones like these are pretty rare from my experience. But despite being so rare, they can be found pretty much anywhere, not just the TTRPG space. So, how do you beat these people? Well, I'll be damned if I advise anyone to just let them have their way, but in this case, the best thing you could have done was, it sounds like what a lot of people did: leave and never come back. Narcissists like Delta and Sierra get off on feeling like they have power over you, and thanks to the fact that these two worm their way into the brain of your RPG server like some kind of self-aggrandizing parasite, as long as you're in the server, they're gonna have control over you, because they've engineered it to be that way by weaponizing the power of the simp. I know you mentioned somewhere in the comments that this server was the product of 6 years of hard labor, but unfortunately it's a fallacy that's all too easy to fall into. I've been lovingly growing a tapeworm in my small intestine for the past 6 years, but I'm not about to start developing nostalgia for the damn thing. Because no matter how long I've been working on it, it's still a parasite that's stealing all my hard-earned nutrients. Part 4 is titled RPG Hell: The War, Part 4. Once I left, I occasionally got updates from a few of the others I stayed in touch with. One of those players was Foxtrot, who decided to try and antagonize me just to be an ass. When I asked him why he was even bothering, his response was, "You're an amusing distraction if nothing else." I didn't bother making any kind of scathing reply, I just blocked him. Everyone else who contacted me were disgruntled and upset. Their mood was that I had been right the whole time. Sierra was running the site like she owned it, becoming the alpha main character. And Delta had gone on an antagonistic rampage. As previously mentioned, she started going down a list of people that she had major grudges against. Eventually, everyone turned on her because they'd gotten sick of her terrible attitude. But since Sierra was always protecting her, everyone soon became even more pissed off at her instead. She knew what Delta was doing and didn't care. Delta knew she was being shielded and kept on escalating. It turned into a cycle of abuse where Sierra was at the heart of it all. Finally, one day Sierra just up and quit. She gave no indication that she'd planned to do so, and she never gave any explanations. She just disappeared in the middle of an argument and never returned. Yes, the argument had been about Delta. Within a day or so, once it was confirmed that Sierra had quit for good, Delta got the fudge out of Dodge and never came back either. Her skirt of protection had vanished, and there were a lot of people ready to tear her apart in character and out of character. They were that sick of her. Thus, the reign of terror by Delta and Sierra came to an anticlimactic end. There wasn't any great battle or stirring debate or trial that ended in an epic declaration of "Begone, thought!" Whatever it was that Sierra wanted or tried to create just didn't happen, and it obviously was never gonna happen. Everyone had turned on her, and whatever respect she had built for herself had been lost. So she went into her own exile. Did she deserve it? Absolutely. She knew that her actions had been unpopular as hell, but that didn't stop her from twisting the knife. I don't know what else had been going on in her life, but the contempt and disregard that she had for everyone else had been her own downfall. No one was responsible for her issues and/or problems, so no one deserved how she treated them. Delta also got what she deserved. Once she recognized that her protection was gone, she evacuated, which meant she knew what had been coming, which meant she knew she had enraged the hell out of everyone. To this day, the friends I have who had been present during the whole period absolutely loathe Delta. Not one of them has ever tried to defend or justify her actions. No one has even heard from her since, which is probably for the better. Foxtrot was one of the people she hurt. Apparently, after she was done with him, he wasn't much more than a broken, bitter man IRL, who had wasted years of time on a girl who never really cared all that much about him. He eventually disappeared, too. A few of the others, who'd been Delta's and Sierra's biggest supporters, also went away. They figured out that they'd been played for idiots and used as attack dogs against me when I had done nothing wrong. The ones who were left were the ones who just couldn't handle that they had been lied to. For me, a few good things did come out of the whole ordeal. Firstly, it's events like that help you identify who your real friends are. I also learned to be much more cautious and much less accepting of bad behavior. No one should ever feel compelled to just accept and tolerate abusive behavior like it's their duty to do so. There comes a point where you have every right to say, no, stop, and enough. And if the other person had any real respect for you, they'll change their behavior and stop being a sadistic bastard. Finally, the whole ordeal has actually served as the backstory for my next character. My original character eventually married a fox woman and had several children with her, some of whom have now matured enough to begin adventuring themselves. And one of them is my current character, a kitsune cleric, seeking to return to the land his parents had been exiled from in order to obtain more information on what had happened after so many years. My old character is more or less retired, but the next generation has stepped forward, their stories yet to be written. But one thing is certain. Delta and Sierra will likely, at this point, never bother me again. End of story. And thus concludes the saga of Sierra, and Delta, and Bravo, and Foxtrot. God damn, OP, you really let a bunch of winners come into your life all at once, huh? You got Sierra the control freak, Delta the quirky sadist, Bravo the guy who gave it all up for a woman who didn't care about him, and Foxtrot, the guy who joined Team Simp at the last minute and is now all butthurt that being an asshole didn't get him laid. They're like the Avengers, except all pathetic-like. Aside from the heresy that is having a character raised in the Imperium of Man marry a fox woman, this seems to be as happy of an ending that could have been expected from what OP originally described as a bad one. OP got a new gaming group, everyone who caused problems disappeared into the ether, never to be seen again, and we got an absolute behemoth of a saga to read through. Despite some questionable writing choices, this was still a pretty fun story to read. Of all the stories I've read on this channel, this had to be one of the most upsetting. The absolute pettiness and entitlement of these people is just astounding. But I think it's important that we take time to remember that despite this story and all the ones I read on this channel, these insufferable creatures are rare in the RPG space. I know it's easy to doom scroll through my whole catalog of videos and think to yourself how awful this community must be, which makes it hard to remember that most people in this hobby are genuinely good people who just want to spend time with the people they care about by playing a game that they all enjoy. I highly encourage you to go and find an RPG group where you fit in, because there's nothing like a good group of friends to remind you what the game is all about. Unless you got a personality like Delta or Sierra, in that case you can kindly fuck off back to the pit that squirted you out. And on that happy note, we have a fan art submission this week. That's right, how about we go ahead and take a look at this week's Gallery of the Drake. This week's fan art comes from viewer Dortchild, and believe me when I tell you, this one was an emotional gut punch. The backstory behind this piece is that Dortchild had lost their best friend Jasper in the summer of 2021, and has recently opened their home to a new dog they have lovingly named Scooter. This piece was sent to me as a thank you for creating content that made them smile during that rough time, and I would be lying if I said I didn't shed a tear or two when I first got that email. Here we see the spirit of the legendary cleric Jasper watching over the brand new adventurer Scooter as he implores the Drake to tell him a story. So, do you have any stories to tell? No, not today. I think we should just sit for a while. Thank you again, Dortchild, for submitting your art. I'm happy that my content has been a comfort for you, and I hope that you were able to enjoy a long and happy life with Scooter like I know you were able to enjoy with Jasper. If you'd like to see your fan art featured in Gallery of the Drake, be sure to send it to the email in my About section. Fan art is my favorite part of doing YouTube, and it means the world to me that I can inspire artists like you to create artwork like this. Well, this is one of the longest, if not the longest story I've ever read on the channel, because as I'm sure you all hear, my voice is fried, so I'm more than ready to go ahead and wrap it up. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and if you feel like supporting the channel further, my Patreon and merchandise links are in the description. I would like to thank you all for listening, and I hope to see you next time in the Den of the Drake.